Welcome to Live Like an Acrobat. I'm your host, Shenea Stiletto, two-time world champion in acrobatic gymnastics, USA Gymnastics Hall of Famer, and circus artist. Thank you for joining me on part 3 of episode 4, Black Acrobatic Gymnasts Experiences Matter, where I will continue my conversation with former acrobatic gymnast Melanie Vaughn and introduce my new special guest, former acrobatic gymnast and current acrobatic gymnastics coach, Rion Jean Page, to the show. Things need to change for Black representation in acrobatic gymnastics, and who do you think is most responsible within the sport for making this change happen? And what are your thoughts and your recommendations or inspirations if people feel confused about how to assist in more Black representation within acrobatic gymnastics? We know that there are, everyone is very interested in trying to understand how better to bring Black representation into the sport. They may not have the words for it, but they're most likely just confused. What do you think that could look like and will look like for now and into the future?
Yeah. I definitely want to start out by saying that I don't think that it is the Black people on the sport that should have the burden of pioneering this change necessarily. But at the same time, I do see so much value in Black people speaking up and sharing their story because as people see that those who they love and those who they've competed with have experienced these things in some ways unknowing to them, I think that will garner support and more solidarity. And solidarity is such a incredibly beautiful thing, but that's not to say that there doesn't need to be action behind that solidarity. It's one thing to say that I support you and I'm here for you, but what does that actually look like, So I think it's on coaches. I think it's on members of the team and parents of the team to really have those discussions, not only at home, but also within their gyms, starting there, about what does it look like to be actively anti-racist. I know that's a phrase that has been circulating around the internet so much, but there's a reason for that, because it's genuinely not enough to just not be racist, and it's oftentimes impossible for specifically white people in a system where, talking bigger than acro, in a system where racism is just so ingrained in daily living, to just not be racist is very challenging because we oftentimes just don't know. So talk about that and discuss actionable items in terms of how are we going to support our Black athletes within this gym and athletes of color, whether that is ordering the leotards in their skin color, making our athletes feel comfortable in their own skin, and not having any shame language surrounding being of different body types, as long as that person is clearly being healthy. Those are just like minute ways in which at the gym level, coaches and teammates could help kind of put an end to this perpetuating of racism. But then at the higher level I don't know the specific language surrounding it, but the board members or whoever creates kind of policies surrounding what judges are judging off of, having those conversations with the judges and the board members if it's explicitly written within the score sheets or judging, to take points off for things such as the non-uniformity in mesh color, skin color, etc. Change those policies. We need more than just talking about it and more than just supporting, but action. And changing those policies is just one step. And then to address the financial inclusion, I know Acro has started giving out scholarships, I think. So possibly providing scholarships to more athletes of color to uplift them and encourage them to continue in the sport and to continue working to those high levels, so we do have that representation even more. And then also, last thing, bias training for judges, because we all have biases and they can be excruciatingly painful to recognize within ourselves, and oftentimes, just hard and challenging. And so there are so many bias tests and worksheets that people can work through to identify their own biases, because we can't do anything about them unless we're aware. And then to take their own steps to work upon addressing those biases within themselves, because even if policy change happens in terms of what judges should be scoring off of, if judges haven't done their own self-work and recognize, oh, wow, yeah, I typically do take scores off because I don't think the trio looks as put together as it could have, because one member is darker toned. If judges don't do their own self-work, then the policy change won't do anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So brilliant. Thank you so much, Mel. And I'm just so grateful for you sharing your insight and for your wisdom and for your just brilliant mastery around revealing the dynamics of racism within the sport and for breaking it down so beautifully. And I wanted to ask you one more question. What do you want to say to your young former self as a young Black acrobat?
I would tell myself to just love myself unconditionally, to not think I had to fit a mold that wasn't necessarily meant for me to fit, to not think I was any less than for looking the way that I did or the way that I do, and just reminding myself that my Black is so beautiful, and it's such a gift to be a part of a community of people who have historically fought through so much and continue to fight through so much. That's what I would tell myself.
And what would you tell Black acrobats that are currently coaching and competing,
mm-hmm.
and Black coaches and Black gym owners and Black judges?
I would tell everybody Black in the sport, if they have the energy and if they feel like this is the time for them, to go ahead and speak up, because our voices do need to be heard, and our stories need to be heard. I would tell Black athletes to challenge the system, just as I would tell coaches, because now more than ever, I think that progress can be made because people are really more open to listening than they have been before, and I think part of that is due to, COVID, having us all at home. There's nothing else you can do but listen. And so if you, as an athlete, feel that you are enduring racism in any form or way, address it head on. And that is easier said than done. I do recognize that. But just empowering yourself to recognize that your voice does matter, and you deserve to experience and love this sport without the racism. And to Black coaches, I would ask them to just work to empower and uplift their youth, especially the Black youth on their team, because Black girls, Black boys, little boys and girls, like, we need protection. They need protection, because the reality is they're growing up in a world that doesn't always value them. And so providing those uplifting talks, private talks, and encouraging them to continue within the sport and to just continue using their voice, I think can be really powerful. And then to just coaches in general, specifically non-Black coaches, open that dialogue with your team and challenge those judges. Push them to explain exactly why they took those points off. No coded language involved. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Mel. I appreciate your vulnerability. I appreciate your insight, and I appreciate your vision, because you have ways that are practical implementations within the sport that can help to push us forward and to combat the systematic racism that we know exists within acrobatic gymnastics and other youth sports as well. And I think that there is so much value in you sharing your voice and you continuing to share your ideas and sharing your experiences with the larger acrobatic gymnastics community. I appreciate your journey. I honor your journey as a Black acrobat. I honor your journey as an acrobat and as an amazing person in the world. I feel that it is very brave and courageous to speak your truth, especially in spaces where it's not made for us. We exist in spaces that are not made for us, and we've existed powerfully, and you've shown up beautifully. And I am so grateful for you of coming on to the show and for speaking with me and for sharing with me and for sharing with the acrobatic gymnastics community, because I know that you are a true voice for change.
Thank you so much for this space and this platform to do this. I am so grateful for you and all that you're doing as well.
And I know some will say that these are just acrobats and you are in some ways minimizing their experience by focusing on the fact that they are Black acrobats and focusing on only what's wrong with Black acrobats within the USA Gymnastics community. And there are so many other issues and larger issues. And I want to give you an example of why it matters to focus specifically on one huge, deep symptom within acrobatic gymnastics and within the sport, within USA Gymnastics. It's the same as I was on the athlete task force, and even before that, calling for action to fight and end abuse within USA Gymnastics, within that culture. And as you see, that when you target that specific issue, which is so deep and to me is like a tumor or a cancer that has metastasized throughout the USA Gymnastics governing body, as we've seen. Once you focus on such a deep problem, because if you focused around other things around the conversation of the abuse instead of the abuse itself, what gains do you think that we would have made and would be making right now? Again, you have to call a thing a thing. And what you will notice is that by focusing on bringing the abuses to light and how deep and how much that affects every single other aspect of USA Gymnastics and athlete care that it creates a ripple effect which undoes all of the other wrongs within the sick system. So that's why we can't say that just focusing on their blackness within the sport is in some way minimizing their contribution or minimizing this very acute problem, because it speaks to a different, deeper problem within USA Gymnastics. This is one of the big issues. It's not a small issue. It is a very big issue. Accessibility, multiple voices, how those different, diverse voices could have potentially affected change before USA Gymnastics turned into what it is today. If you don't understand that and you don't think that, I think you are very much missing the plot. Because when you put more voices and eyes within an environment from very different backgrounds, then you create the potential for more people to call out and see more things that could be harmful to others. When you're checked differently in an environment by those that do not look like you, that sits different and it hits different. It undoes problems that might have occurred. It undoes issues or potentially catastrophic elements in situations. We know that it does. We know that it can prevent all sorts of ills within an organization when there are diverse voices and more diverse peoples. And that when your groupthink mentality only looks like itself, it only has itself to reflect on. My next guest is Rion Jean Page, and he is the head coach and director of the Seacoast Acro program in San Luis Obispo, California. Rion competed as an acrobatic gymnast for 3 years in Level 7, Level 10, and 12 to 18 Junior Elite as a mixed pair, and retired from competition in 2015, which is when he became head coach of the Seacoast Acro program. Rion is going into his 5th year as head coach of the Seacoast Acro program, and last year, his 11 to 16 trio placed second at the Dresden Acro Cup in Germany. Rion celebrated his birthday on the show, and I wish him a most beautiful celebration. Please welcome Rion Jean Page to the show.
Hi, Rion. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Of course. Hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing so well. Thank you so much for asking.
Good, thank you.
I wanted again to express how important it is to hear from a male acrobatic experience. As you stated, there are so few male acrobats in general, and even fewer black male acrobats, and that you have a different level of experiences and challenges. Also, you shared with me, Rion, that it's hard to feel completely comfortable walking into a room when you know that all eyes may be on you just because of the color of your skin. So with that said, I wanted you to please elaborate on that for us, for our listeners, and also, how did it feel competing as a black athlete in acrobatic gymnastics? You mentioned that you aged out for your career internationally, but do you think other black athletes would have gone further in the sport and competed longer internationally if not for racial bias? Or those that maybe make it onto the national team, for example, any thoughts on the black experience making it that far?
Of course, definitely. So to answer your first question, my experience as a black acrobat and a black male acrobat, I just feel like male and female black acrobats have very similar experiences, but also very different experiences. I think Cameron Jones said it best when she mentioned that, you know, one of the privileges in the sport is getting a leotard that will probably match your skin tone. That's definitely something that female Black acrobats have to deal with. And that sentiment definitely made me think back to a trio that I remember seeing a few years ago when I was competing. It's a trio, so there were definitely, you know, 3 athletes, or there were 2 white girls and a black girl, and as soon as they walked onto the floor, I just remember people whispering about the black girl's leotard. It didn't match her skin tone at all. And, you know, she had pretty dark skin, and the mesh was definitely made for a girl with more fair skin, you know, a lighter skin tone. So I felt really bad for the girl because people were whispering about her. Everyone was just focusing on that. And I feel like no one was even focusing on the routine anymore. There was just a distraction that stole the attention instead. And, you know, in acro, you're judged on difficulty, execution, and then, of course, artistry. And you get deductions on artistry if something looks quote-unquote off. And I feel like that definitely was something that needed to be addressed, unfortunately. And, you know, I don't know the situation that led to that happening, or, you know, even if the coach had thought to ask about a different leotard color for her skin tone. But, you know, it's just something that once Cameron brought it up, it just brought light to the issue that I had never really thought about, you know. So that's more from a female's perspective, that I can definitely see that a lot of my, you know, I'm a head coach of an acro team in San Luis Obispo, California. I don't have any black athletes, but, you know, I do have all girl athletes, and I can definitely imagine the girls definitely having to have an issue with that. And I feel like all coaches need to be paying attention to that, and leotard manufacturers as well. Being a male acrobat in this sport was also very difficult. You know, you walk into a room and you don't know if people are looking at you because you're black, because of the fact that you're a male and not a female. And, you know, there's just so much underrepresentation in this sport that it just feels kind of awkward, you know?
Yes, of course. And so in terms of maybe making it onto the national team and going further in the sport, do you feel that racial bias plays a factor in the longevity of a Black acrobat's career at all? And that there may be, you know, elements of what you were just speaking of that come into play once you're on the national team and you're highlighted and spotlighted even more? And do you feel like there's lack of Black representation on the national team and on the international acrobatic scene?
Yeah, I definitely do think that there is a lack of representation, and that in itself is going to stop people from going forward. You know, if there's no one at the top to look up to that looks just like you, it's going to be hard for you to push forward, because you're going to start to think that it's impossible after a while. You're going to think, well, you know what, no one else has done it before. Well, am I going to be the first to do it? You know, and, you know, there are, of course, you know, Black athletes on the national team, but like I said, it's just very underrepresented. And I feel like, you know, as soon as we have more people up there, it's going to be a little bit easier for athletes to want to jump into the sport and for them to think that it's possible to do.
Thank you so much. When I competed, though there were so few of us Black acrobats, we didn't necessarily band together. We were across states and there wasn't social media. Do you feel like it's still that way? Has social media changed this? Or do you feel like Black coaches and Black athletes are pretty still isolated from one another like they were in my generation?
So I feel like social media has made it more obvious to see what's going on, because with social media you can see pictures and videos of coaches and athletes all around the country, all around the world, and you definitely see what's being represented, which is really nice. I do feel like there is a bit of a connection, but I don't know if people are trying very hard to make that an obvious connection. Personally, I can count the number of Black head coaches on one hand that I know about. So in addition to being a Black athlete in this sport, I feel like being a coach has felt the same exact way. I think that there's Cameron Jones at Extreme, who you interviewed a few days ago, and then there is the head coach at Saks in Louisiana, Kels, and I try to talk to her every time I see her. We see each other at nationals every year. We see each other at Future Stars and Open Training Camp, and actually, I also think that she's one of the only black Afro gym owners in the country. But, those are the only head coaches that I see that are black, and I feel like there's also a lack of representation there. So I don't think that makes it any easier for black athletes to necessarily feel comfortable, But I will say that every single time I see the head coach of Saks, we always make a point of talking to each other, and we've had athletes compete against each other in the past, and, we'll sit together at training camps and things like that. So I definitely feel like there's a bond there, there's a connection there, but it's only on the national level. It's only once or twice a year, which is really hard.
Yes, I can imagine. Do you feel ever like you coach differently than you would if you weren't black? Or is coaching easier in some ways than competing while black?
I wouldn't say coaching is easier, but I will say I think I do coach a little bit differently because of that. There are so many stereotypes, so many negative stereotypes that go with being black, and I feel like I'm constantly thinking about those when I'm coaching, and I definitely was when I was competing as well. So I don't want to come off as, this aggressive black man, so I feel like I definitely try to walk on a tightrope for the most part when I'm coaching my athletes, and I don't want to come off as, fulfilling this negative stereotype about black people, but I also want to be comfortable in my own skin. So there's a huge part of me that also is very comfortable with my athletes and very comfortable with my coworkers and the parents of my athletes, that I do feel like I can be myself, but there's always that little bit of negativity in there that I don't want for people to hold against me.
Yes. It's in many ways, I believe, exhausting. You expressed to me, Rion, that everyone should be taking the time to educate themselves because of everything that is going on around in the country right now, and that listening to the experiences of black people is a great way to educate oneself. What do you think needs to change for black representation in acrobatic gymnastics that you think is important for the USA Gymnastics community to know, and that can help assist them in moving forward to promote and implement real change?
Yeah, a change definitely needs to happen, and I do feel like representation is one of the biggest ways to make that happen. The more people there are to speak up for you, the more people there are to create a voice that's going to lead to change, and the more voices we have, the easier it is to be heard. So I personally absolutely love what you are doing, Shenea, and I feel like, like you mentioned, I just feel like educating everyone and everyone taking the time to educate themselves is the best thing that they can be doing right now. I just feel like there is just so much negativity going on in this world right now, and listening to a podcast about Black Afro athlete experiences in this community is one of the things that will just help people open up their eyes. And I feel like USAG also needs to kind of take that into consideration and, maybe have, our next acro director be black, or have more, people to represent us, coaches as well.
Yes, I agree. Is there anything else that is present pertaining to the topic that you want to share that we didn't touch on, or even something specifically that you're creating or have created, or something that you know of that you want the community to support, that's important to you as a Black acrobat and Black athlete before and as a coach now? And is there something that you want to share with your fellow Black coaches, Black judges, Black acrobats, that are currently, like you, within the community and striving to advocate and help bring everyone together in a much more equal way with more equity, and to support each other to move through these present challenging times as, I would say, as peacefully, as constructively, and as productively as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that everyone honestly just needs to take the time to, read some of the literature that is out there right now, listen to some of the podcasts, and talk to people that you know, and just let their voice be heard for a little bit. A little bit of inspiration that I just want all of the Black acro gymnasts to hear is that I know it's hard to show up when there's no one else in the room that looks like you. I've been there myself, and I know it just sometimes doesn't feel right, but you never know who you're inspiring. You never know who's watching you. You never know who considers you to be the role model, so show up for them. There could be someone in the audience thinking, I wouldn't be comfortable doing this sport, or everyone's going to be looking at me because I feel different. And then as soon as they see you walk out into the floor and do what they thought was impossible, you need to do it for those people. Do it for those who are going to follow in your footsteps once you're done competing. And what we need in this sport right now is representation. So the more people that take that first step, the better. It's easier to make a change when there's representation. And like I said earlier, it's easier to make a change when there are enough voices to be heard. So we need as much people speaking up for us as we possibly can have right now. I'm fortunate enough to feel like I have allies in this sport. I feel like I've had people that have always had my back in this sport. I had an amazing partner. I was in a mixed pair for 3 years, and, she had such a supportive family and still does, and I enjoy, talking with them. I have amazing athletes. I have amazing parents on my team that are also equally supportive, and so many people lately have sent me messages and sent cards in the mail and sent emails, and I've talked face-to-face with people, and I really appreciate that people have been reaching out, but I just want people to continue educating themselves. So I definitely feel like I have allies in this sport and in this community, and I feel like we're definitely on the right track with this.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Rion, for coming onto the show today. I appreciate your vulnerability. I appreciate your insights. I appreciate your inspiration. Thank you so much for helping us to create a way forward. And I look forward to seeing all of the amazing things that you're going to do within the sport of acrobatic gymnastics, all of the things that your athletes are going to be doing, and all the ways that I know that your inspiration is going to create a ripple effect throughout the USA Gymnastics community. So I say thank you again so much for coming onto the show and for showing up as who you are, so beautiful during this time and space right now.
Thank you so much for having me, Shenea, and allowing me to speak up and, giving another platform for us to educate on. I really appreciate it.
You're so welcome. And until we speak again, please stay safe and please stay healthy.
I think it's a good question to ask or answer for the people that don't think that there is an issue within acrobatic gymnastics of racial bias or racism or racial injustice within the sport, that they think, well, it's just too hard to hold on to the Black athletes, and there's so many factors that come into play, and it's not that those encounters with them or situations are racially motivated. It's just that there happens to be so few of them because of those societal disparities, or because our situations are deemed too hard or too difficult or too much for people. And so then that's another reason that they are able to excuse our lack of representation away. And I feel like that's an important thing to say as well for people within the sport and the community of USA Gymnastics, the organizations, that will just point to those things and then think that there is nothing that they can do to effectuate those things and change them, that they can't make different changes. I had coaches and gym owners that were helpful during those challenging times, whether it be financially, whether it be, familial issues that come into play. There are many issues that come into play for athletes just in general that affect one's ability to show up and make training and to compete. But I really want those within the community that really think that there is not a problem to really sit back and to listen to our experiences and to recognize that this is a deep problem, that it is systemic, that there are things that you can do to support the Black acrobatic gymnastics community and Black presence within USA Gymnastics, because visibility does matter and accountability for these issues does matter, and that it's not just the outward society that is to blame, and that those things are the only things that affect athlete participation. As you hear Rion Page so eloquently explain about the comments made about the Black acrobatic gymnast who was put out onto the floor in a costume, in a leotard that did not match her, and the whispers. And that those whispers are exactly what we're talking about. Those are the moments that we're speaking about, and the moments that we know that occur when we're not around, unfortunately. The things that are said when we leave the room, the things that are said when we're not at the gym, when you're consistently always referred to as the Black one, or that Black girl, or, oh yeah, she's the Black one. It's comments like these that stay with you, that you hear throughout your entire life. I hear them even now throughout my entire life. I'm always referred to as, oh, the Black one. And this is just systemic within society. Everybody says it. It's a natural response. It's become a natural response. But being called out, feeling like you're called out when you're a kid and when you're an athlete as the Black one is very painful. And so even with the people that say that they don't see color and they are, that's not what they see you as soon as someone has to refer to you in a space, they call you the Black acrobat. They can't just say Shenea. And most oftentimes they can't say Shenea because I don't normally have my name pronounced correctly. I can remember, I think, just a certain amount of competitions where my name was announced properly. And I wish that I would have actually asked Rion about that, because maybe that is something that he experienced as well. I know that that is very much a part of our Black experience, and I can count the times that my name was spelled right on my medal, and how much that affects you when your name is never spelled right, when your name is never pronounced properly, when people announce you improperly to the rest of the world right before you go onto the floor, and how jarring that is to not have your name pronounced properly, and how that's not something that you should be thinking about when you are just about to start your routine, when you're just about to go into your dynamic routine, or tempo as we used to call it. How you shudder slightly or flinch, and that's what's on your mind instead of all of the corrections and things that you know you need to get right for this routine. So those are our experiences as Black acrobatic gymnasts. And yes, again, we know that there are shared experiences throughout other people of color, and also too for our non-Black, non-people of color competitors, that certain things are universal, but we know overwhelmingly, compellingly, that many of these experiences are negatively pronounced within the Black experience. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Live Like an Acrobat. Please continue to also join me for extended conversations of each podcast episode on the circuspreneurblog.com. Until next time, please stay safe and stay healthy.